Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. I am your host, Pablo Fuentes. Hey, lovers of small businesses and good stories in general. Welcome to episode 102 of Small Business War Stories. And today I had the pleasure and honor to sit down with Paul Jarvis, who is an author, and he's an entrepreneur. He does a lot of things, but he just wrote a book called Company of One. And he is really interesting. I made a little bit of an exception. Most of the time these shows are done in person, and that's a big thing that we do differently, is meeting with people in person and face-to-face. This was done remotely. Paul lives in Canada, and I live in Texas. And we sat down and chatted about his new book. I finished it cover to cover. It's a really interesting way to approach business in the 21st century, because a lot of times with business, we have this mindset that in order to be successful, we have to grow. In order to be successful, we have to do more. We have to do, and Paul presents an alternative point of view, which is that you can build something that is successful that is not necessarily predicated upon constantly growing. And if you set it up for your own life and your own needs, you can lead a very happy, successful life with your business without constantly being worried about growing and more. Because with more growth, like they say, more money, more problems. You got to have more people, manage more people, the more expectations. So we had a really interesting conversation about all the things that make a company of one worth building and worth running, and what that looks like in some of the lessons that are in the book. The book is great. I read it, like I said, cover to cover. It's called Company of One, and it just came out yesterday, so you can pick it up at any major book suppliers. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Paul Jarvis of Company of One. And we are live here at Small Business War Stories. And today I have the pleasure and honor to sit down with Paul Jarvis, who is the author of the new book, Company of One. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Yeah, Pablo, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We're making an exception today. This show is being recorded remotely. You are up in beautiful British Columbia, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and we are doing this remotely. Your book is very, very compelling, and I have a lot of questions for you, and I think you have a lot of advice that can be very valuable for small businesses and for people who are thinking about starting their small business. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the inspiration. So your book is called Company of One, and I read the entire book, and to summarize a little bit, in a one sentence, it's like why you don't necessarily have to be a huge company to be successful, and how you can, in essence, define your own success by being a company of one, and how technology and society today enables you to do that, right?
Yeah, totally.
And what inspired you to write this? What was the impetus?
Yeah, so I always kind of felt like I've kind of been running my business like this for 20 years, but it wasn't really a conscious decision to run it like this. It was more just I've always liked the work more than I've liked managing other people, so I didn't want to promote myself out of a job I liked to be like a manager of a team. And so I've just always been kind of running it in that way. It's funny, like the actual book came from a surf session that I was out surfing with one of my buddies on Vancouver Island, where I live.
Wow, that's cool.
And yeah, I mean, like we get pretty good at surfing with thick wetsuits, with 6mm wetsuits.
Jesus.
So when we do travel to places like Hawaii or that, our paddle power is much greater if we're not wearing a wetsuit, because we paddle so much wearing wetsuits. I was out surfing with my buddy who's a freelance accountant, and it was like September or October, this is years ago. And he was like, I've made enough for the year. I'm going to go rock climbing for the rest of the year. And he takes off on a wave, and I'm sitting there like bobbing up and down in the water like surfers do. And I was like, What did you just say to me? And then he paddled back, he caught the wave, paddled back around. We started talking about it. And he was like, well, I know what enough is for me. I know I know how much revenue and profit I need to generate to like pay for my car, my mortgage and food. I know how much I need to put away for savings to feel comfortable. And he's like, if I make more than that, I would have to, like, if I wanted to make more than that, I would have to hire people. I would have to add more work to my plate. And it's like diminishing returns. He's like, I know what enough is, so I work towards that, and then I have the freedom to choose to not work
That's
for a
beautiful.
little while.
So
Yeah,
that's
and I
kind
was
of
like, I feel the same. I was like,
yeah.
this is me.
That's kind of the I've heard the action before of there are two ways to be rich. You either make more or you spend less, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of defining your own success. I have so many questions. I mean, I really want to talk about the issue of envy, but we'll talk about that later in how that comes up. But okay, so you're surfing, and then you say you basically had this epiphany that you also wanted this for yourself.
Well, it was an epiphany that this is kind of how I've been operating, but I had never consciously thought about it, or I'd never thought about it in that way. And I was like, this is how I'm operating. Like, there's something here. Like, why is nobody else talking about this? Because this makes so much sense to me. This makes so much, like, everybody that I talk to, it's like, this makes so much sense to me. I'm like, well, why is nobody talking about this?
Yeah.
They should be.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So you then that prompted you to how long did it take you to write the book? I mean, from that surf moment until the publication of the book this week.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. So I started that changed my mindset and how I thought about running my business. And so I was it was on my mind for several years, but I still felt like it's just me and my like South African accountant buddy who felt this way. Like, nobody else thinks about business this way. So it was just me. But then I was like, I'm a writer. Maybe I'm just going to write about this to see, just to share this idea with people. It's a weird idea, but it might resonate. So I shared it with my newsletter. And I was inundated with replies from people saying, hey, I kind of feel the same way about like not wanting to grow my business or being happy with where it's at or determining enough. And I was just floored by the number of replies I got. So I thought, I think there's something here. Like, I think this isn't just me having this weird idea. I think there's a movement of people who feel this way.
Yep.
And because I'm a writer, because I write books, I decided, hey, I think this can be a book. I think I can traditionally publish this book. So I looked for an agent, found one. She helped find a publisher. And then, yeah, it took me probably about a year and a half, start to finish, to write the book.
Okay.
From that point, yeah.
Okay. Very cool. How did you? Let's take a little bit of a side journey here. But you talked about a newsletter, which is one of the things you mentioned several times in your book as one of the tactics. There's strategies which are like, kind of like big picture things, but then the tactics, a lot of our listeners are interested in things that are actionable and tactics. So how did you build your newsletter, and how many people, if you can share, are in it now, and how long did it take to get there?
Yeah, there's about 32,000 people, I think, last time I checked. I don't actually check very often. But yeah, there's over 30,000 people. I've been doing it for 6 years. So it's called the Sunday Dispatches, which means I send out an article that I write every Sunday. I've never missed a Sunday, other than I take a break November, December. Nobody pays attention in November and December anyways. Yeah. But yeah, I've never missed a Sunday. I share an article a week, every single week. And it started small. I think the first newsletter went out to like 16 people in November 2012, and then like 60 people. And it's just grown slowly over time. And at this point, it's enough. And like, dude, 95% of my revenue is generated from my newsletter. Wow. So like, my business exists because of my newsletter. All roads lead from my newsletter to products that I sell.
That is
I'm barely on social media. I've never had a Facebook account, never been on LinkedIn. Don't use anything else other than my newsletter to communicate. I don't even have an email address on my website, but my email address goes out to 30-odd thousand people a week, and they hit reply and we talk. And that's the engagement, and that's how I like to foster relationships with my audience is the newsletter. And that, like, everything comes from the newsletter.
That is unbelievable. So, and what are the products that you selling?
Right now, it's the book, obviously, but I sell 2 online courses and 2 SaaS software products.
Okay, and what do those products do? Can you share?
Sure. One is called Fathom Analytics. It's privacy GRDP focused GPT. I always get the
Yeah,
acronym wrong.
GDPR. Yeah.
GDPR.
Yep.
Very, yeah, so it's privacy focused analytics. It tracks website visits without tracking user information. The other one is called WP Complete. It's a plugin for WordPress online courses that lets students mark lessons as complete so they can kind of track their progress through courses, which it boggles my mind that nobody else built this
Right.
before I did.
Right.
And then the two courses are Creative Class, which teaches freelancers how to do business, and Chimp Essentials, which teaches people how to use MailChimp. Because, like I said, newsletters are the biggest part of my business. So I like to teach people how to use one of them properly. And MailChimp's what I use. So that's what I teach other people how to use.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah, I may have to buy that product myself. That's great. That's great. Okay, so that is your company of one. So this is when you write this book, you're writing from a first person personal experience. This is not just theory or pie in the sky. This is something that you have actually done and you're successfully doing, and you kind of conceptualize that and turn it into a book.
Yeah, I've been running my own business, my own company of one for 20 years. So the book is actually fairly light on personal stories, but a lot of the ideas come from personal experience. And then I went out and found like research to back it up or studies to back it up or other people's stories. The book is really other people's stories,
Right.
which I think is more interesting anyways. Other than the beginning and the end of the book are me, but then the whole middle of the book is other people.
Sure thing. Sure thing. So you brought an interesting point, which kind of ties up to this, which has to do with the non-replicability of your own personality, which is basically you can copy a product, you can copy a service to many extents, but it's extraordinarily difficult, if not impossible, to copy you. Right. So your particular, and that resonates with me because that's one of the things I think about sometimes about myself. It's like, well, you can, do something. You can also do a podcast interview in small businesses, but the guy with his blues guitar and his dog driving around the country interviewing people in person, that's pretty unique and that's pretty difficult, in the guy with my particular background. So how do you think about that, and what are the steps if somebody wants to take their I guess their personality or their life and turn that into a company of one? What are the kind of initial steps that they can take?
Yeah, I mean, the point that you made here, I think, is really valid. Where it's easy to like, there's how many business books on Amazon, there's how many courses on the internet, there's how many podcasts on iTunes. But what people want is and it's funny. I did a survey of my newsletter. I think it was 2 years ago, and I asked people why they bought things from me. It's like the weirdest question ever, but I also think it's like the most valuable question to ask people is like, why me? Why'd you pick my business course
Right.
or my book over somebody else?
Sure.
And overwhelmingly, people were like, because you're the one who wrote it. Because I trust you, because I like to listen to you. I like your point of view. I like the way that you think. And I think that if we lean on that, if we lean on what our personality is and so I think if we just put our personality to the forefront, that's fairly egotistical because it's just assuming that like we're interesting, we're important, our voice matters. But I think where it makes sense from a business case is figuring out how the unique things about ourselves it can help other people or can be valuable to other people or can be something that makes people feel that they're not alone. Right? Like for myself, like I don't look like a business person. Like if you saw me on the street, you'd think like he works at a skateboard store
Okay.
or that like he's a heavy metal musician. Like I'm covered in tattoos. I don't own a suit. I dress like a bum. And like I have a very different personality to most business people. But there's a lot of other people out there who are business people but don't feel like they fit that mold of like this is what a business person looks like. This is how a business person acts.
Sure.
Like and so I can like those people can relate to me because they see themselves in me. So if I put that aspect of my personality forward, then people can feel like I'm not alone. Like
Right.
there are other people, like I don't have to be this quote unquote business person, like in a suit and tie and like very professional sounding. Like I don't have a professional bone in my body. Like I'm a really good business person. I know how to do business. I know how to sell. I'm not professional. Like, I swear all the time, very sarcastic. I'm weird.
Well, it
Like, but
depends on your
that,
definition of professional. I mean, let me push back on that. I
yeah,
mean, if you, I would argue that the fact that this is your profession and that you're good at it makes you a professional, right? So it
yes,
maybe
but there
less. You're
is,
not very formal.
yeah, exactly. And I think that that's kind of the but people do think, man, that like you have to put on this air of being professional or you have to act like an expert. I say, "Well, how do experts act? Like really, like I push back on that as well because I don't think that's a valid point. I
Yeah,
think
I
that
agree.
I would rather lean on just who I like. I don't, I'm not smart enough to be somebody else.
Yeah, no,
Is
that's
really what
great.
it comes down
That's
to.
great. No, my point is, I'm trying to say that you shouldn't say that. I mean, I think you are a professional. You're just a different type of
Yeah.
professional. You're a professional at being you.
Yeah, not the standard like business
Right.
MBA definition
Right.
of what a professional could be.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So you quote Pat Riley in there, and I'd love to bring that up. And in there's an idea that comes up like the disease of more, right? So
Hmm.
how do you and I wish I had the exact quote in front of me. I should have written it down. But he basically brings up like more is not always better. What do you remember the exact quote off the top of your head?
Uh, Disease of more. No, well, I remember this story
Yeah, yeah. So do
where
you
he
want to talk? Do you
basic
want to talk about that story, and then and I'd love to then second to like when do you know when more is better and when more is not better?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rest of the quote was that the success is often the first step towards disaster.
Yeah.
Because right after he coached, I think it was the 1980 Lakers or something like that. Right after he coached them to the win, they ended up like all of the top players on the team ended up getting like licensing deals. They spent time with like Jack Nicholson at his house and like they spent so much time like spending all the money they were making doing advertisements. They weren't focusing on what it was that made them great to begin with. They weren't focused on what it took to win a championship because as they got more accolades, more awards. It's basically like size is associated with success. Success is associated with hubris, and then hubris is the beginning of the end of success. Where it's hard to, as you get more and more, it's hard to keep focusing on the things that got you there in the first place,
Right.
and it's just difficult to keep that up long term. Where like if better meant more, then it would be the same word. Like better is better, more isn't better, better is better, I
Right,
think.
right. Actually, it's
Yeah.
funny. Yesterday, I was talking to my friend Nick Betcher, who is a manager here at Austin Vintage Guitars and a professional musician here in Austin. He was an early guest. This is going to be episode 100 and change of this podcast, but he was in the first 10 episodes, and we were talking about how as a musician, you when you're first learning a particular skill or a particular passage, you repeat it over and over and over and over and over until it
Hmm.
becomes second nature. But then a lot of times when musicians become really successful, they stop that practice of doing that repetitive, boring work, which is, kind of like what you're saying that like
Yeah.
the success leads people to stop doing the things that made them successful.
It's difficult. Like you're too busy going on the Tonight Show,
Right.
playing like a minute and a half of your song to like sit at home and practice. You feel like that's beneath you when really that's what got you there in the first
So
place.
how do you fight that? How do you? I mean, that takes a tremendous amount of self awareness because that's not an easy thing to do, right? The ego is a real thing, and people do feed on their success.
Yeah, I think you hit on the point there is that it takes introspection. It takes like critical evaluation and not like I think ego is so important because ego gets us that first step because we think, okay, I need ego to say that I can get up on stage and play a song in front of other people, or I need ego to say what exists in the market isn't good enough. I can start a business and do this better than anybody else.
Hmm.
So ego is so important in the beginning, but it helps us and it helps other people in that case. Where ego kind of leads us astray is when we just assume that we deserve the things that we have or that like the things that we're doing are just good and we can just coast off of them, which I think is always a bad, just like that's the beginning of the end. If you think you can coast off of the things that you've done in the past and not work hard in the future, then that is the beginning of the end for sure.
That is really interesting because we talk about, okay, so I do want to talk more about ego and envy, but I don't want to forget that point that you just said, because you talk about, so to paraphrase you said, like, when you forget about, you stop doing the things that made you successful in the past, then you're going to start going downhill. However, in the book, one of the things you talk about is you want to be able to build systems that build repeatable income for you and that allow you to live the life that you want to live. So that means that you do have to put up a lot of upfront work that is going to change or go down over time. So how do you marry those two concepts?
Yeah, I mean, putting in place systems and processes, I don't think has anything to do with ego. So I think that it's good to kind of figure out, like, these are businesses we're running. So if we can, and running a business is hard. So if we can take some of those hard things off of our plate, then it's valuable. Like, it takes me just as long to write an article and send it to one person as it does to write an article and send it to 30,000 people. That's a great use of a system where I'm still connecting with an audience and it's still coming from my email address. Like, if I typically get like 200 or 300 replies every week, and it's not going to some inbox that an assistant looks at or just going off into the ether. Like, it's going to me. It goes to my personal inbox. And like, I can take the time, like, yes, I'm using a system to communicate en masse with my audience, but I haven't taken the human aspect out of it. I'm still present to read every email that people send me, to reply to all the ones where people have questions or people make a great point or people just want to talk. Yep. Like, I can still do things like that, even like automation sequences for my courses. Like, those are supremely helpful because they help me sell. But if somebody has a question and they hit reply, it's going to a human being. Okay. It's not just like going dead on the internet somewhere.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of how you marry the two.
Okay.
Is you do things that can scale without growing, but you also don't remove the human aspect and the personality aspect of it.
Okay. So actually, that was a question I was going to ask you later, but I'll ask you now. Like, how do you increase automation so you don't have to be there at all times? But then you also talk about the concept of always being there for your customers. So you go heavily into that in the book. That was the one part of the book that I had a little bit of a problem with, because you use examples of companies that are very large, where people are answering the phones and it's not companies of one, right? And those are the examples that you're using when you talk about customer success and the importance of customer success. But since it came up now, let's talk about it now. How do you marry this idea of not having to be chained to your business versus being there for your customers and having this customer centricity that leads you to succeed as a company of one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about setting expectations. Like, I would never publish a phone number on any of my products because I don't want to have to answer the phone 24/7.
Right.
Like, by not setting that expectation, I can just avoid it. And so if somebody emails me, then like a customer support request, it's never like I don't ever build products where customer service needs to be answered immediately or the person's business fails.
Right.
Like that, like I would never build a product like that because then I would have to support a product like that. I would have to be on call. Never want to be on call. That sounds really, really awful. Like, I like to be able to take breaks for weeks at a time or even just like a day at a time. If it's sunny outside, I live in the Pacific Northwest. If it's sunny out, it's not usually sunny. I want to go for a bike ride.
That makes sense. Do you travel a lot too? Just
not recently, but in the past I have.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, I try to set expectations. Like even when I was doing client service work, I would tell clients, like, there's no design emergencies. Like, I can get back to you within 24 hours or 48 hours, and I'm going to do my best work. If I have to always be on call, it's really hard to be always expecting a call or an email and be able to do good work. So I think just setting those expectations is really, really important, especially when you're a small business, to say, like, I will get back to you. Like, I'm going to get back to you, hopefully within 24 hours. And we're going to solve this. And I'm going to do whatever I can to help fix the problem. Like, even with the WordPress product that I sell, 90% of the customer service has nothing to do with our plugin. It has to do with the way they've set their WordPress sites up.
Right.
And like, I'll help them. Like, I want their site to work. Like, even if it's not my plugin, if I can help fix something, I'm going to fix it, because that's just the type of business that I want to run. So I'll go above and beyond whenever I can. to make that happen. And I will try to offload a lot of this stuff because if people are asking the same questions, it's a waste of both of our times if I have to personally answer it. If it's a question that comes up over and over again, I would rather create like a video that they can watch or have like these are the common questions, here are videos or here are articles on all of these questions. So if I can answer the questions that don't need me to be present and don't need somebody else to wait for me to be present, then I'm going to do that. And then all I have to answer are the questions that only a human being could answer.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to answer them in like 30 seconds, but I'm going to answer them typically within a day because I do have usually an hour a day where I can like do customer support, which I really like doing. So
Okay.
that's kind of how I deal
that
with
makes
it.
that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for clarifying that because again, that was the one part of the book where I had this dissonance where I was like, well, all these examples are
Sure.
from very much larger companies, so that have a lot of people doing this. Let's talk about envy. So you talk about Socrates, and you bring up the quote that envy is the ulcer of the soul. So it's a very natural human emotion, right? So you're talking about, let's use you as an example. So you're talking about you have your WordPress plugin and your educational programs. There are other people selling WordPress plugins and educational programs, and some of them may be, 10 times your size in terms of revenue. And how do you manage? I mean, you presumably have a life you like in British Columbia, but then once in a while you get that little demon in your shoulder. It's like, Paul, you could also have an estate in Kona. And, why not, scale this? It's just the same product. You just need to sell more of it. So that is driven by envy, right? By the seeing somebody else who does have an estate in Kona. How do you manage that? What is that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's not possible to manage it 100%. I think we're all human. We're all going to feel that way sometimes. I think if we start making business decisions based on that, then I think we run into problems. Like I can look at somebody else's business and read like an income report or something like that and be like, it would be nice to make like $1 million a month. But like, that's probably going to pass because that doesn't really matter to me. I think that it's important to, especially when we work for ourselves, to realize that if we're working for ourselves, we get to define what success is. And like if I really wanted an estate in Kona as well, I would know that I would have to work harder. I would have to probably have a larger business. I would probably have to hire people to build a business that can generate enough revenue to support itself and my house in Kona, which might be really nice. I can also just like fly to Hawaii and stay there for a week and get it out of my system
Right.
as well.
Right.
So I think that I would rather live for my own values than somebody else's. I would rather like define success for me. Like I don't need a lot to be happy. I don't think most of us need a lot to be happy. Like I think I need enough to be comfortable in my life. But past that, it's diminishing returns. Just like my buddy that I talked about in the beginning. Like he knows how much he needs to make. He knows what his enough number is. And then he can be free to travel the rest of the year. Once he reaches enough, like he can go to Kona, and I don't think there's any rock climbing there, but he could definitely like go surfing in Hawaii for a month, which I've done before. I spent a month surfing in Hawaii, which was great, and I didn't have to wear a wetsuit every day. But then like I got it out of my system. Like I was happy to stay there. And I think I think there's kind of like this societal trend where it's like, as you make more, you spend more. So you're not actually bringing home more. Like as the money your business makes increases, then maybe you buy a bigger house or a fancier car, or you like increase your expenses and you're not actually profiting more. Yep. So I think I've always really liked to figure out like what the minimum amount of comfort is in my life where I'm happy and comfortable and my bases are covered, and not increase that as my revenue increases. Right. And I mean, by doing that, like I have a very simple life, but I'm pretty pleased with it. Like there's nothing I really
you
need.
Save more too that way.
Oh yeah, like I can put as much as I like. Most years I try to save half of my income in a savings, because I would rather just have that money available if I need it, or available later on, or available if like a family member needs it. Like the reason it's funny that like there's some people that are like adverse to making money because they think being a capitalist is evil. But I think that like the reason I make money isn't just to make more money. It's like if something happens to a family member and I can take care of it, that's why I make money. if there's a charity I know that's in need that I can donate to, then that's why I make money. Like I'd rather make money for things like that. And in that case, I really like making money. I like doing sales and marketing. I like having a profitable business, but only up to a certain point. Like it doesn't like I don't need to envy other people on a day-to-day basis or make business decisions based on envy because it's not that like I'm running the business for myself.
Yeah.
Like I want to be able to have the freedom to make the choices that suit me, that suit the life that I want to have day to day.
Yeah, it makes sense. What a good waypoint to identify. I mean, I wrote it down here in the question that I sent you as keeping up with the career Joneses, right? It's kind of the name I gave it.
Yeah.
Have you identified like waypoint, like times when you maybe started to fall into a trap? You're like, oh, yep, there it is. Then I'm going to pull back.
For sure. Like in my early 20s, I was like, to be a successful business person, I need to make $1 million a year. And like, where did that number come from? I don't even know. It was just, I just thought like, oh, well, in
That'll go a
society,
long ways in British Columbia.
yeah, well, not really. The
Oh,
cost of living here
it
is
depends on where
ridiculous.
I guess it depends on what part of British Columbia you live in, but
Yeah, like Vancouver is one of the most expensive cities in the world to
okay.
live.
For some reason, when we talk about all this mountain biking, I had you out there like on the way to Whistler, like in a forest or something. But
Whistler's expensive. Whistler's become such a
well,
commercial
but on the way
place.
there, there's like all those
Yeah.
beautiful kind of like mountainsides and forests, and I don't think those are that expensive.
Yeah, now it is because
Yeah.
Vancouver is wholly unaffordable. But I think like if we start to think about like what is it that we need and like what change it like if we have more than we need is how useful is that? So how useful is it to our businesses, to our daily life? How useful is growth to our existing customers? Because most of the time it's not. Most of the time having a bigger business means we're spreading ourselves too thin to take care of our existing customers because we're focused more on acquisition than retention at that point.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's like the maintenance costs or the obligation debt from saying yes to opportunities builds a business that we're not happy with the data. Like it always comes back to me for like how I want to spend my day. So my business is completely set up around how I like to spend my day. I love writing. I love being by myself and doing work. So my business is primarily set up to foster that. I love that I don't have to work a specific set of hours if I don't want to. Like as long as I get my work done during the day, it doesn't matter if I work at 6 a.m., at 6 p.m., at 1 p.m. Like I'm not a night owl, so I wouldn't be working later than 6 anyways.
Yeah.
But like I would rather like I all the decisions I make in my business are to better the life that I have on a day-to-day basis.
That is very cool. That's very cool. Let's talk a little bit about the another tension that comes up in your book, which is the jack of all trades versus focus question, right? So one of the things you talk about is to be effective as a company of one. You have to be able to do a lot of things. So you have to be good at sales. You have to be good at developing products. You have to be good at customer service. Presumably, in your case, you have to be good at some technical things. And that varies obviously from person to person, company to company. But then you also bring up the question of focus and how it's very important to focus on something, because if you don't focus on something, then you're not going to succeed at anything. How do you marry those two concepts? And that's something that I've struggled with in the past, and I think a lot of people that I've met have also struggled with.
For sure, I've struggled with it myself. Like I think that there needs to be like a spark for the work that you do. Like there needs to be the thing that's so in demand that people want to pay you to do it. And I mean, the main skills that I have are design and writing, and that's how I've made a living. And so I think a business or a company of one needs to be built off of like the thing that makes you an expert, the thing that makes you in demand. But you also have to marry that with other things, like you talked about. Like you also have to be. Otherwise, you can work for somebody else, and there's no problem with that. Like if you are good at design and all you want to do with your day is design, then go work for somebody else and be a designer, because they're going to take care of HR, they're going to take care of accounting, they're going to take care of legal, they're going to take care of sales. All you have to do is design. It's perfect if that's what you want.
Sure.
But if you want to work for yourself, you also have to you have to do the work that you get paid to do and also run the business. And I think you have to get good at some of those things. You don't have to make them like your sole focus. Like I don't solely focus on sales and marketing, even though I do those things, but I do have to spend some time doing those. Or you have to hire them out. Like I have probably about 5 or 6 people that I work with on a daily basis in my business, and they're all freelancers, but I can see areas where it's something that I don't necessarily want to learn how to do, or I don't see value in me learning how to do. So I'll gladly pay somebody else. Like I pay my accountant to file my taxes. I don't want to learn how to file my taxes. I also don't want to go get the licensing required to be able to file my taxes with my government. Same with legal documents. I have a lawyer that he's not part of my business, just like my accountant doesn't just work for me, but I can hire these people as I need them.
Right.
And they do the job. I don't have to pay them if I don't need them. And it's a perfect relationship. And I think even for things like podcast editing, like I host a few podcasts, I don't want to. I mean, in that scenario, I do know how to do audio engineering a tiny bit, not really well, but I could do it. But it's not how I want to spend my time. And the person that I use, it charges a fee that makes it worth it for me, where the sponsorships that I have easily cover what he charges.
Yep.
Same with editing. Like I'm really good at writing, but I'm not good at editing my writing. I don't think many people are, or they're just like ridiculously talented, and I'm jealous that they can do both things. But like I gladly pay a content editor who I work with almost every day. He has other clients though. So I think we always need to find that mix of like, we do need to get good at a bunch of different things, but we always need to rely on that one kind of like core skill that's like the foundation of the business. And then we just need to get good at supporting that skill with all the other business endeavors, or just hire out or hire freelancers to do the things that we can't do, or that we don't want to do, or that wouldn't be valuable for us to do.
Very cool. Do you want to plug your podcast real quick? You say you have more than one podcast or just one?
Yeah, Company of One, the podcast that goes with the book. That's the main one right now.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And you can find that on all major podcasting platforms as well.
Yes.
Okay, rock and roll. Another really, really important concept that you bring up in the book is the importance of underlying purpose, right? So you talk about how to be truly effective at executing. There has to be a real underlying purpose. Basically, in other words, if all you're trying to do is execute for the sake of making money without really believing in what you're doing, you're going to run out of steam. And I've seen that happen before. Can you talk a little bit more about that? So how do you, what have you seen when people execute without that authentic, deep underlying purpose? And how do you think about that in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I think typically they end up, or even myself has ended up in a place that they don't necessarily like if they're making decisions based not on their purpose. Like, I think that the whole practical way to think about purpose is that it's the lens through which all business decisions filter through. Like for like opportunities, or so a good example of that for me is speaking gigs. I get asked to do speaking gigs all the time. I don't like speaking. Like we talked about this before we started recording. I was a touring musician for a long time. I'm comfortable being on stage, but in order to travel, it takes, like, I live in the middle of nowhere. It takes an extra day on either side, sometimes longer if there's no power or if flights or boats are canceled. It takes too long to travel. I also don't like being in groups of people. And I feel like if my purpose is to just be as valuable as I can to my audience, if I spent all my time speaking, that wouldn't be a good use of my time. It's also not something I like doing. So I can make the decision, even if it's like a great opportunity to keynote some like big conference. It's like, I'm okay to say no to that because I know that it doesn't line up with my purpose, and the obligation debt of saying yes to that opportunity doesn't work. Like, yes, it could further my career, but like, I don't think there's any one thing that is like make or break for anybody's career. I think having a big break is like such a fallacy that most big breaks are like 10 years of work to get to that point. So I think if we think about why did we start a business in the first place? Like, it's just as simple as that. Like, why did we start? What are we trying to get out of it? And like, how did the decisions that we're making in our business either line up with that or take us further away from that?
Yeah.
And I think that if we have that idea in our head, like always, like, for making decisions, like, does this line up with what I want? Yes or no? And if it doesn't, then it's easier for us to say no, because a lot of times we have trouble saying no because we don't want to let other people down. We don't want to like turn down opportunities. But it becomes easier if we're like, well, this doesn't actually line up with the purpose. Like, this doesn't line up with why I started this business in the first place. Yeah. Like, I could be offered $1 million from an investor to like take one of my software products to the next level. I actually have been offered VC money for some of my products. And it's like, that seems good. Like, it would be great to have a ton more money or cash influx, but like, I don't want the obligation that comes with that. I don't want the responsibility of having to like run my business based on what an investor wants. Like, for other people, that makes sense. And I'm not even saying that it doesn't make sense for other people, but I know for myself, I don't need that money. Like, I can focus on growing my business slowly and it makes enough money and it's profitable. So I'm okay with taking things slow in that case, because then I have way more freedom in my life to make decisions.
Yeah. And one of the things that kind of ties back to is the notion that you have built your own mailing list, and 95% of your revenues are from that mailing list. So you don't have a huge Instagram following or a Twitter following and so forth.
No.
And that's really interesting because it kind of runs counter to a lot of the conventional wisdom that in order to be able to have an income from your work like that, you do need to have a huge presence on social media. So you basically almost built your own private social network of people who are interested in what you have to say, and you just go into their inbox, right?
Yeah. And I mean, even with like getting a book deal, like I got a pretty substantial book deal for a first time traditional author, even though I've published self-published books. But publishers don't even care about my social media. Like, the first question they asked was, how many people are on your mailing list and what's your open rate? Because they know that that's way more important. Like, I can promote something, like I'm on Twitter sort of mostly just for sarcasm, and I could promote something on Twitter and maybe one couple people are going to click it. Maybe somebody will buy something. But if I send an email, like, I can see, well, shit, like 1,000 people just bought this thing because I sent out an email. Like, there's no comparison in terms of interaction and traction and even purchases from social media to email for me.
Okay. That's really interesting. I think that's a really valuable concept that a lot of people can learn from, because it's a lot of times, people chase this sort of I guess, dream of, social fame, whereas, it takes longer, but if you do it the right way, it can be way more effective to build your own audience privately, which then probably, like your open rates and your sale rates and everything like that are much better with that, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of broke Instagram influencers. This is like, unfortunately, that's the case. Like, it's hard to make money off of that. I mean, some people obviously do, but a lot of those people were famous to begin with. Yeah. Or it's so tiny. It's like winning the lottery of getting like a major record label deal. Like, it's basically like winning like you have as much chance of winning the lottery as you do making like hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars off of a social media account.
Right.
Like, it's doable, sure, but it's very hard. Whereas if I focus on serving a small audience and connecting with them and generating profit from them early, then it's less of a gamble by a lot.
So why did you write this book? It would seem like it's potentially, this book is an attempt to, become bigger, right? Or not?
Not really. Like, it's funny. I was sitting down with another author friend of mine who's been on like all of the bestseller lists, and they were like, "What do you like? What if everything changes for you?" I'm like after this book comes out, and I'm like, I'm still in control. Like, I can say what's going to change and what doesn't. Like, I'm still very much in control of my own destiny. Where, like, if this book becomes really popular, that's cool, and I'd be glad that this message is getting out, because it's kind of counter to the messaging that's out there right now for entrepreneurs and business owners. But like, it doesn't mean my life is going to change. Like, I don't need to buy a faster car because I sell like 1 million copies. I don't need a bigger house. My house is too big to begin with, and it isn't even very big.
Yeah.
Like, nothing's like nothing. Even like when my wife asked me, like, well, what would change in our lives if we had like if somebody gave us $10 million, I'm like, I don't think anything would change. Wow. Like, I don't think anything would change. Like,
that requires self-control and knowledge of yourself, right? That requires you knowing that, that even if you were to buy that bigger house, the concept, hedonic adaptation, where you very quickly adapt to the new level of wealth, would basically mean that you're not happier.
Yeah. I mean, Terry Pratchett is probably one of my favorite authors, and he talked about this, that horizontal wealth versus vertical wealth, where you can you can, as your income increases, like we talked about, you just keep buying more and more and you're spending more. And like Terry Pratchett, I think he sold like 85 million books. He still lived in the same house that he bought in the 60s, and he drove a Volvo.
Yeah.
And he was super happy. Like, I would rather be happy. I would rather find a way to be happy and content in the present than shoot for hopefully being happy and content in the future if certain things happen, which are probably out of my control to begin with.
Right.
Like, I'm not in control of how many books I sell, but if I'm happy writing the book, then I don't care.
That's true.
Like, I hope it sells a lot of copies, but if it doesn't, I still really enjoyed writing the book. I still think it's a fucking awesome book.
Yeah.
Like, if 10 people read it, if 10 million people read it, I'm still pleased with the process.
Well, I read it cover to cover. I really liked it.
Thank you.
And a good way to end this, to put a nice bow on it, would actually be talking about the concept that you pull at the very end of the book, where you talk about being too small to fail, which is actually exactly what you just said, right? So how do you think about the concept of being too small to fail? What does that mean to you? And how does that tie all of these things we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think that the bigger a business is, the more resources it requires. Like, the more responsibilities, the more stress, the more profit is needed. And so I think this notion of something being too big to fail is, one, outdated, and two, not based in fact anymore. Like, everything that's big is fragile. I think even in evolution, like, if we look at so something in nature, if it's always growing, always rapidly increasing, it's called cancer, and cancer is not good. Right? Or in evolution, there's this tendency for species to evolve larger and become more dominant, but there's also this counterbalance to kill off those large and dominant species. Like, just there's almost no megafauna left in the world. Like, these apex predators are going extinct, whereas things like ants or rats or cockroaches, like these things that are small, these things that don't require very much, are the things that endure. Like, the smallest things, the most paranoid things, are the most enduring things. And if we look about that in business, like, that's kind of the case. Like, the example at the end of the book is a spa in Japan, natural hot springs, where they've
I want to go there, by the way, after you describe it.
I totally want to go there as well. Okay. And it's like the longest continuously running business in the world. They didn't open chains. They didn't open franchises.
And they've been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, right?
Hundreds of, like, they've survived world wars. They start, like, samurai used to, like, it boggles my mind how long this business has been around. It's been a family business. And if we look at the way commerce used to work outside of the last 100 years, when mega corporations have kind of taken over, it's that there were these small, interconnected, multi-generational businesses that stayed in business because they were profitable. It's only this tiny blip on the timeline where commerce has evolved to focus more on growth and profit, and focus on, like, these mega multinational corporations. It's like, this is just this isn't the way that business has always worked.
Yeah.
And if we assume that this is how business worked, we're wrong, because it's just how business has worked since the Industrial Revolution. And it doesn't mean it's right. It just means that this is how it's worked. Yeah. And I do see a shift moving back towards that, but still using things like, I'm a tech nerd, so, like, moving back to these small interconnected businesses, but relying on things like technology and automation to some degree to help move things along. And I think that that's really where I'm hopeful that we're all going to end up.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. Where can people find you if people are interested in learning more? So they're going to be able to find your book that came out yesterday as of the publication of this podcast, and that's Company of One on Amazon, right?
Yes.
What is your website? Where can we help you grow your mailing list even further?
Sure. If you Google Paul Jarvis or go to pjrvs.com, that's where my newsletter lives. What I've been talking about, Sunday Dispatches, I send out one article a week every Sunday, and it talks, like, all of the articles are things that you and I have talked about on the show today. So if you like the things that we've talked about, you'll hopefully like the newsletter.
Sounds good. I think it's been extraordinarily helpful. It's been educational for me. I'm here taking notes about all the things you're saying. I'm definitely going to listen to this episode a few different times, because we really go deep into the ideas of the book that I already thought the book is had a lot of great ideas, but to bring your own personal experience and, like, go in more depth, has been fascinating for me. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on small business war stories today.
Yeah, thanks, Pablo. I appreciate it.
All right, thanks. Take care, Paul.
Cheers.
Small business war stories. Small businesses are the soul of America. And this is where they tell their stories. am your host, Pablo Fuentes.